So we are live. Hello friends, I Sarah Rahaman Shaikh, project lead for the story Project 14 by www.tellmeyourstory.biz. Welcome you to the sixth Tell Me Your Story calls for submission on the theme, inviting people to interpret it in their own creative ways. Registrations are also open for a host of workshops for new or aspiring authors. This evening or morning, depending on your respective time zones, I consider myself extremely privileged to have with us today Professor Sari Katajala-Peltoma, Deborah Hyde, and Neil D. Silva. Neil D. Silva will shortly join us. Uh, Proceeding with the panel discussion tonight, we are going introducing our first panelist of the panel discussion, Sari Katajala-Peltoma. She is a professor of cultural history at the University of Turku, Finland. She is a medievalist specializing in the late medieval colonization process and lived religion, gender, and family in a comparative perspective. Her publications include Demonic Possession and Lived Religion in Later Medieval Europe by Oxford University Press 2020. Welcome, ma'am. We are immensely delighted to have you with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. This is a pleasure.
Of the session is Deborah Hyde. Deborah Hyde is a writer and folklorist. She edited the Skeptic magazine for 10 years and is a fellow of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. She appears regularly on TV, radio, podcast, and at live events. She is one of the regular experts on the enormously successful Uncanny podcast from BBC Sounds and contribute to its popular forerunner, the Battersea Poltergeist.
Good to be here.
Acclaimed writer in the horror genre. With 14 books already published, including best selling titles such as Maya's New Husband, Yakshini. Hello, sir. We are just giving your intro.
Okay, I'm here.
We are live.
Just sorry for the delay. I was just
No
setting
issues,
up
sir.
hotel room, and I don't know how the connection would be, but okay, let's do this.
Sure, sir. So we were doing the bio titles such as Maya's New Husband, Yakshini, Haunted, The Spirits Talk to Me. De Silva has read, researched, and written across the many subgenres of horror. His insights as a guest speaker at Litfests across the country and on several popular podcasts, including The Ranveer Show with Beer Biceps, have been well appreciated by his legion of horror loving readers. He has also served on the jury for the prestigious Bram Stoker Awards, being the chair for the with us today.
Sarah, did I lose your audio? I'm not able to hear you.
Yes, I'm afraid you've cut out. For the people at home, I think she may have restarted the device so that she can come back in with the audio working this time, because we had an intermittent fault. So I'm sure it'll just be a matter of waiting a couple of minutes.
I guess that's what she's doing. She's just dropped off. So I think she's reconnecting.
Yeah. Well, never mind about demons in people. This is demons in the digital works.
Apparently, yes.
Nothing ever goes smoothly. Here we go. Fingers crossed.
I am so sorry. There's some connectivity issue that we are facing. Because of that, we are having a little bit of issue. Just bear with us. Till then, I'm just waiting for Sarah to join back. Hello, Deborah. Hello, Sari. Hello, Neil. So good to have you all here, but we are just a little stuck. So please bear with us.
No worries, we are here.
Are we actually getting out to the outside world? It's just is that feed constant?
No, you all are showing perfect. It's just that the moderator Sarah is having a little bit of issue, because of which we are just so okay. We have our backup ready, so let me just get Hoimonti in, and she will begin the discussion till the time Sarah is in a position to come back again. Okay. So. Hoimonti, can you begin the discussion?
Hello, everyone. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
I'm so sorry because of all of this confusion which happened. So do we start with the questions right away?
Yeah, I'm all set. Yes, Hemanti, we can go on.
Thank you so much. So if you have already spoken about your 10 minutes of the time which you were supposed to, I'm so sorry, I'm just here. So I don't know whether you have already spoken 10 minutes of the...
No, we haven't. I guess
we haven't, and it may be a good idea to do that first, because that's the sort of structured thought that we have first.
Yeah, so we didn't speak yet, so you could start with that, yes.
Sure. So I would like Ms. Deborah to start your discussion. We would love to hear you, ma'am. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, as the introduction said, I am a folklorist and writer. I'm interested in why people believe in the supernatural, and people mostly believe in the dark supernatural. I mean, we tend to concentrate on gods and good things, but historically, anthropologically, you look at things and people concentrate on the dark supernatural because human life is very difficult under natural circumstances, and you need sort of coping mechanisms to deal with those kinds of things. The first thing I'd like to point out is that most religions and traditions don't just have the kind of modern concept of a person as kind of animated meat, if you like. The neuroscientific modern view is that our consciousness, our behavior, is an emergent property of this body thing that we live in, and that when we go, so does that. Most religious traditions have the idea, for example, if you just pick one from an arbitrary example. The voodoo religion has the concept of a corpse cadaver, you know, literally the body. And then there's the nam, which is a sort of an animating principle, which gradually fades away from a body after death, and very elegantly provides the model, I suppose, of why corpses take a while to decompose. There's the zétoile, which is a sort of a fate in the sky, and there are two parts of the personality, the gros bon ange and the petit bon ange, which are identified with what we would think of as personality or perhaps soul. Now, this is far from unusual. You could pick every religious tradition and see these types of models with, you know, 2 or 5 or 10 pieces of you that make up you. And in the Western monotheistic tradition, we tend to have a soul and a body. So I think the reason for this is fairly understandable, which is that it's very, very difficult for somebody to see somebody who they have loved die and just become an inanimate piece of meat, that they have just gone. I mean, it's so counterintuitive. And although it isn't a scientific way of looking at it, the fact is we don't live thinking scientifically. We think living intuitively, because that is what served us through our evolutionary history. We're here to survive, not to come up with the truth. So if you have this multi-part self, then you can have the meat puppet, which is animated by another spirit, or you can have the spirit, which is you without the body, and that would be a ghost. So possession as a concept, I think, comes reasonably naturally to us. And in fact, if you look at the major monotheistic religions, Christianity, for example, Jesus could reasonably be regarded as a traveling therapeutic exorcist. He did lots of exorcism. So he performed an exorcism on Mary Magdalene, and on the, if you remember, in the Gerasenes, and you sort of exorcised the legion of demons into a herd of pigs. So Christianity is totally okay with the idea that exorcism exists. So is Judaism. There's the idea of dibuks, which are creatures which are kind of like the unquiet dead. Or in Islam, you have jinn. Jinn are kind of like us. They're made of smokeless flame, and they have personalities, and you know, they can be good or bad. Ifrit are pretty bad. They're never quite nice. So this possession idea is fairly intuitive, and it's written into our major religions. So is possession a good thing or a bad thing? Well, in lots of contexts, it's thought to be just fine. I mean, again, if we go back to voodoo, you have a situation where a priest, a male priest, a Hungan, or a female priest, a Mambo, would invite possession by a god, and you could tell which god had walked into the mix by the props they pick up, which are left out for them to be able to pick up. There's a lower, a spirit called Uzuli, and she likes the color pink, and she likes she's very feminine. She might put on jewelry, so you can tell who is there at the time. And this is a therapeutic process. You might go to a Hungan or a lower, a Hungan or a Mambo, and ask them for help with your fortunes going wrong, or somebody's ill. And this lower will come into the priest, and they will mediate and be able to hopefully help you. It's basically a shamanistic practice. And in shamanism, you have the same thing going on. You have a mediator, a skilled spiritual mediator, asking for a spirit to come in and then inform and help the congregation. Now, this isn't a random process. This is a social process. So whether you believe in the actual veracity of whether there is a demon or a spirit coming into somebody, the fact is that there's a script that people know what's going on, and that there are some things you should do and some things you shouldn't do. Is possession bad? Well, some people would say that possession is bad. So there are lots of traditions, for example, though possession was very tied up with witchcraft. I'm sure we have another guest who'll speak to us on this subject. In the witch hunts in Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries, so witchcraft was very tied up with the idea of possession. There's just one example of a man named Urbain Grandier who was accused of devil worship because a load of nuns at a convent ended up being allegedly possessed by demons. Now, what you can normally see with these cases, as with poltergeist cases, is you can see a whole social process going on as well. In that particular case, it was thought to be a bit of a political hit, really, a very hard-hitting cardinal wanted Grandier. He wanted to get him. He managed in the end. And we also look at the sort of psychological profiles of the nuns. It was thought that the Mother Superior, who was in charge, had fixated upon Grandier, and so she was sort of, you know, she was erotically charged with the idea of him. And of course, the other nuns in there may or may not have wanted to be there. There are lots of cases of women basically being put in nunneries to get them out of the way. So we're looking at what used to be called mass hysteria, what we would now probably call mass sociogenic illness. So it depends on your religious traditions as to whether or not being taken by an entity is a good thing or a bad thing. So what could the cause of these phenomena be? Well, I'm just going to look at the time to make sure that I'm not overstaying my welcome. Am I okay if I still got a few more minutes? Yeah, okay, cool. So what if this really happens, and it does really happen, what's the cause? Well, if we're looking at a sort of a purely physical cause from a modern point of view, then we could say it's all sorts of things. I mean, people have temporary psychotic events, postpartum psychotic events. For example, there was a mystic in medieval 15th century medieval England called Marjorie Kemp, who had a postpartum psychosis, and she was subject to a bit of inquiry as to whether or not she was basically obsessed, troubled from outside, if you like, or possessed. Possessed by demons. They found in her favor in the end, but it could have gone quite badly for her if they hadn't. So, and temporary psychotic events can arise from stress, and of course they can arise from what we would now recognize as mental illnesses, things like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, the kinds of things where people very rarely these days with medical interventions get that bad. But again, it can also be functional. As I said, there is a script. People understand what's going on. In a voodoo ceremony, if somebody has paid for the ceremony and then a stranger comes in and said, oh, well, that Loa is speaking to me, that's a really gauche thing to do. The person who's paid for the ceremony is the person who's doing the inquiry. So it may seem outside fairly random, but it isn't random at all. There is a script. People know what's going on, and people are going to, they're conforming to a series of expectations. So this is a very real social process. Oh yes, in shamanism, for example, you also get rituals where people might wonder why all the crops are failing. You know, this could be down to a supernatural event. And if you're looking for a scapegoat, the shaman will take on the spirit and will identify what people are doing wrong within the community. In other words, something that is within their control, something that they can do, a way of controlling the ultimate fairly random nature of our universe. Now, the shaman might not be dealing with a foreign entity, but he does belong to that community, and he knows who people dislike, and he knows who people blame. And there are normal standards of behavior within a community. Most agrarian communities, for example, you're supposed to share. Capitalism is very unusual in that respect. So if you're greedy, if you're taking more than you give, then you could be blamed and you could pay a penalty for that. So we should remember that none of these kinds of rituals are random. They may seem random to us because we're not in that community, but they're real to the people who go through them. So in the modern context, what do we do about possession and and demons and spirits? Well, I think that we have a very enduring part of our personality. If you want to know about why people see things that aren't there, there is a really, really good book. It's called The Science of Weird Shit. And it is about how we missee the world. As I've said, we don't see the world as it really is. We have, for example, a hyper-developed tendency to see agency, to see something intelligent and potentially dangerous in the world. We see faces in the clouds, you know. I mean, that's a really, really good evolutionary trait. It means that our ancestors didn't get eaten by tigers, but it also means that we jump at shadows and tend to assume that they're not there. So understanding the systematic ways that we get things wrong is a really, really useful kind of a skill. It's something that I think we could benefit from learning in schools. But with possession and with exorcism, if you take, you know, sort of an institution like the Catholic Church, for example, it's far too old and wily by now to go around throwing these things around because it knows it would be taken to task. But exorcism is unfortunately still a very present and quite often abusive process that happens in sort of charismatic modern churches, perhaps Pentecostal churches, that kind of thing. And it happens in Africa. There's a great guy called Leo Igwe who campaigns against this in Africa. And of course, we can see the social process behind this. It's usually children are accused who don't have protectors and who take more than they can give, because children can't give anything yet. They're not economically active. So if you have orphans and things like that, they can end up being accused of witchcraft and of possession and be very badly treated, sometimes killed. So I think it's a fascinating subject for us. It's very good to be able to look at this and just study in an academic sense, but we have to bear in mind that it's still a live issue, and that even if we're not dealing with actual entities, with demonic entities, we are dealing with social reality. People believe this. They have scripts and ways of dealing with these situations, and people can sometimes get hurt. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. And indeed, it's a very interesting and insightful take, which we got to hear from you. So, to reintroduce the common question which was there, I just got hold of the question, and I'll just read it out once so that
Okay.
our audience would have a context in background. So the question was a common question to all of you, was that what are your personal beliefs regarding the possession of evil spirits? Do you believe in an invisible world that harbors negative and energies? Please share your views and experience on the extensive cultural, religious, and historical discourses on demonic jinn possessions, alongside scientific evidence that offers alternative explanations. So we move on to our next panelist. Sari, can you please take it over? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So, as the introduction in the beginning said, I'm a medievalist. So we are going centuries back now, and demonic possession was very, very much a real phenomenon during the Middle Ages. The devil and demons and demonic activity was something that the Catholic Church even deemed very important and defined them in its dogmas. So they were part of the official theology too, not only sort of folk belief. That is, we easily assume these days. So Catholic Church thought that Lucifer was a fallen angel. So he was much more powerful, both spiritually and physically than humans, but he wasn't as powerful as God. So it was not a question of this kind of dual model that there would be two gods, one good and one bad, not officially at least. What the people actually thought was could have been a bit different. in the, the way they lived their religion in the daily life. So my special area that I'm focusing on, the source material, is canonization processes, which are actually interrogations of person's sanctity and the miracles he or she have performed. So I have studied those miracles where a saint has delivered a person from demonic possession. And they were very rather typical in these kind of interrogations, because as we already heard, these have these types of miracles come from already from the Bible. Jesus did already this kind of cast out the malign spirit. So it was important manifestation of saintly powers. And I have focused mainly on centuries from 13th to mid 15th century. And back then, exorcism was not yet such a ritual that we think of it quite often today. It was more of this kind of unexpected divine grace. It took place by the powers of the saint, not by the powers of the priest doing certain ceremonies or doing certain rituals. And this kind of material, you find a lot of these kind of cases of demonic possession, various explanations why the malign spirit had taken over this particular person, and also the way that people have dealt with that particular person in their daily life. And what have come up in my research is that even though there were these kind of official teachings and official dogmas, it was still very much a kind of local cultural phenomenon, meaning that there were different kind of justifications and understandings of the phenomenon in different parts of Europe. What is interesting in my view is that the cases tend to be particularly numerous both in the southern parts of Europe, that is in Italy, and then in the north, in Scandinavia. In canonization processes, you find particularly many numbers in both these kind of sort of opposite ends of Europe, even though Italy is in a way also the center of Europe, because the papacy, the papal powers were located there. During the Middle Ages, demonic possession was sometimes, it could be mixed with some kind of physical elements as well. People had quite often also sort of physical symptoms. They rolled their eyes, foaming mouths, or they kind of lost the ability to use their limbs or speech or senses or something like that. But most typical thing, however, was that these people were sort of out of their mind. They were acting strangely. They were not themselves, so you find different kind of you find a lot of these kind of cases, but they are not always labeled as demonic possession. Sometimes they can be labeled as raving madness, or sometimes just like paralysis, even though with the exact same symptoms. So that's why my argument is that during the Middle Ages, demonic possession was essentially a social phenomenon. Of course, people thought it was a spiritual phenomenon because a malevolent spirit had taken over his victim. But it was social phenomenon in a way that it required the community around to acknowledge that this is actually, there are malevolent spirits at work here. This is not an ordinary illness. There were no direct sort of automatic categories that people knew what was happening. It required negotiation. It required sort of interaction within the community. And what I also find quite interesting in a way, during the Middle Ages, the victims of demonic possession were quite often just that. They were victims. They were not yet connected with witchcraft. That comes later in the beginning of early modern era. Or demonic possession could be a punishment from sin. But just as well, it could have been just, it could have happened just out of bad luck, because demons were more powerful than humans, and they were very malevolent. They could possess somebody just kind of out of spite. So you didn't have to necessarily do anything wrong to be possessed. And sometimes maybe it's because of this, because it's not necessarily that you are a bad person and you get what you deserve if you are possessed. The communities quite often seem to be quite tolerant towards these persons. Demoniacs could be very blasphemous. They could be very aggressive physically and also with words if they were acting out of their minds. But yet we find cases where the community testifies that the victim has been possessed like for decades, but the community did not abandon him or her, more often her, but it's not exclusively feminine phenomenon, the demonic possession during the Middle Ages. So if I'm thinking about my own preliminary ideas before I started my research project, I would say that the phenomenon of demonic possession during the Middle Ages, it's much more complex. You can't really tell, definite categories that would be valid all through the Europe. They are very much local variables, and then it's not a way to put a person in his or her place, like witchcraft accusations quite often were. The victims are still considered or thought of that they are innocent, and there seems to be some sort of kind of toleration and even kind of supportive actions from the side of the community. But if we think of this kind of belief in malevolent spirit, that was very much real during the Middle Ages. As I said, it was officially defined by the church. What are the powers of demons, and how do they do their things, and how can they possess a person, etc. And a lot of discussion that ends up kind of a discipline of its own, demonology, in the mid 15th century. And in the kind of everyday life of these people who were possessed, or who someone in their family or the community was possessed, this phenomenon was very real. It was something that was very concrete, and they needed concrete measures to get over with. And so I do believe that it was real for these people, and these experiences were real for them. But personally, obviously, I don't believe that there are these kind of malevolent spirits that could act independently of human kind of consciousness or human reasoning or human explaining them as malevolent spirits acting. Yeah, I think that's my time. Thanks.
Thank you so much. That was indeed fascinating to hear you. Moving forward with our next panelist, Neil sir, can you please take over? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hamanti, and it was a pleasure hearing from you both, Deborah and Sari. Different voices from different parts of the world and different cultures that you brought into the discussion. I'm going to talk. I'm a Roman Catholic by my religion, but my works and I'm a horror author. So my books are largely about uh, the spirits and demons as we know within the Hindu lore, the Hindu culture. I come from India, and a lot of research has gone into these books. And I like to read about mythology, so I'm going to confine my discussion to uh, this particular world. So here we have a kind of trichotomy, I would say, because we have on one side, mythologically speaking, the devas, who are the gods. Then we have the asuras, who are the demons, and they are on the two opposite sides of the spectrum. And we, the humankind, is somewhere in the middle. Now, I'm giving a very simplistic picture because there are other kinds of entities and beings also. Like we have a whole class of demigods. So, this is a system that has been prevailing since the time the world has been created. And in Hinduism, the Genesis goes way back than the Christian Genesis. Of course, there can be no comparison, but this is what we are made to believe by the religious texts that Hinduism has. So here In our case, when we talk about possessions, it is not always a demonic possession. We even have something which are possessions by gods. And to a large extent, godly possessions are what drive the belief system of a lot of Hindus. Like, I'll give you examples because this would not make sense otherwise. We have a whole ritual here which is practiced in parts of North India, which is called as the Jagrata or Jagar. If I transliterate this word, it would just mean to be awake. So it's actually a waking ritual where people stay awake the whole night. The purpose is to appease the spirits of their ancestors. So this family who does this, the host family, they might be going through some difficult times, like there might be an illness, or there might be some poverty or a difficulty in the family, and to get through that, they want to appease one of the spirits of their ancestors. So, to do that, an elaborate ritual is set up in the house of the person where the entire village is invited, and there is a Pandit kind of person who is called as the Jagaria, and then there is a musician who plays a dhol, and it is quite a vibe to see this because there is this dhol playing and the jagaria sings, and then everybody joins in the singing. And what are these songs are just extolling the virtues of the people who have died in the family or the spirits who still exist. And what's the purpose? The purpose is that we'll do this the whole night, and we hope that the spirits come to us, they talk to us, and they tell us what is the difficulty, what is the solution to the difficulty that we are facing. Now, does this happen? Now, I don't know, skeptics might say that it is just an exercise in futility, in nothing. But those who have actually seen the Jagar taking place, they cannot believe what unfolds in front of them because I have seen this. I've seen this personally. I've also seen this in there are a lot of videos on YouTube also that you can see about the Jagars being performed live. What happens in this scenario is that the people who are sitting in a kind of a gathering, they start behaving in erratic ways. I mean, they will throw their limbs about, they will dance, and they will contort their bodies, their faces will turn, and it seems that they are not themselves for those few minutes, or maybe it can extend to even up till the morning. And they start speaking in tongues. They start talking things about what happened in the past, and where the solution lies. So sometimes there are situations where problems that the families have been facing for years have been solved through these jaggers. Well, these things can go wrong too. Like, if suppose the belief is that now that person has been possessed by the spirit of an ancestor, but this may go wrong if the spirit had some kind of vendetta or wanted some kind of unfulfilled desire for which it stays, it doesn't go back. So there are such cases also. So this is the case of the jagar which happens. The jagar is very common, not just in North India, but in all parts of India. And this happens during the Navratri festival also. There's this 9-day long festival that we have somewhere in October, November, where a lot of worship is done, 9 nights of dance and worship. And during this period, also, a lot of such cases are reported from across the country. And I started out, I to give some context, I am a postgraduate in organic chemistry. So I have spent my years, my formative years, with empirical formulas, with theory, and I wanted proof for everything. But then when I became a horror author and I started researching these things, one thing that I very clearly understood is that there is no definition and explanation to the universe. You cannot explain everything with proof. So there were a lot of things that just stay in an area which I would just prefer to call it by a very simple term, the unknown, which is where all my work lies, or the horror, the entire horror that we generate as authors or creators of the genre. We deal with the unknown. We deal with things that are not known to humankind, And it's a journey in exploration. We try to find what the truth is. The Hindu belief, again, and the Western belief, the Christian belief, is that our body is composed of matter and there is an energy component to it. That's what a paranormal investigator will put it like. So there is an energy component to it, which you either call a soul, or you call the ruh, or you call the atma. You give it whatever word you wish to. But this is the soul component that we have. When we die, our body is going to dissipate. It's going to go back to its elements. But what happens to that driving force that makes us human, that makes you you, and that makes me me? So that force, maybe, we don't know, somewhere it still lingers, it still persists. And this is, if you believe the paranormal theory of this is a form of energy, and the energy will stay. And that is the reason why, uh, when these investigators go about to detect ghosts, as you must have seen in the movies like Conjuring, of course, a very bad way of showing these things, but there are these devices by which they try to find out whether there is a potential energy source somewhere or not. And we have ghost meters are now sold on Amazon also. So there are these things where there is a kind of a metaphor that ghosts are energy. But then that might be also true, because if you think a lot of it, we think about it from a chemistry perspective also. Our cells are matter, so we know exactly each and every molecule that makes up a cell. We know what is the DNA structure. We know exactly the chemical structure of it. But then why can't we replicate life itself? We can maybe replicate a cell, which the Uri Miller experiment had actually done so. We had created living cells. We had created cells. I stand corrected, but we could not give them life. We could not make those cells live. They were just matter. So this life comes from a place of which we have no clue about, and that is what is the foundation stone of the paranormal across cultures, across religions, that we do not know where our spiritual energy comes from. Then we try to give it some name. The names might be different, but eventually we are all on the same path. To give you another example of a godly position, and then I'll go on to a demonic one. In India, a film was made last year and it became a big hit. The movie's name was Kantara, and it was a small budget movie. But when the movie released, it showed people a side of India that even Indians did not know. So you know how India is. India is a huge country. There are so many cultures and civilizations that we did not know about this one part that was shown in Kantara. And it comes from my native place, so I knew about it, but I was very happy to see it in film. So I'll tell you what it was about. It dealt with a ritual, ritualistic practice called as the Bhuta Kola. It's a dance. Bhuta Kola is a dance, and it happens in certain parts of a state called as Karnataka, the North Karnataka part of it, in the villages, which are very close to forests, right? This system originated there way centuries ago. The forest people, the dwellers of the forest, they used to believe that forests are maintained by a spirit. So this gives rise to the whole concept of a forest deity, right? And they used to pray to the forest deity. And I believe that uh, this practice was in existence right from the times when we were completely pagans. Religion took over later, but there was a time when we were completely pagans and we used to worship the forces of nature. So probably that was the time when the whole concept of a forest deity came into existence. And there is a name to this deity. We call the deity as a daiva. Now, nobody can see a daiva. A daiva resides somewhere in the forest, and because essentially the daiva spirit is masculine, makes the rules that governs the forest and the people who live around it. Now, how do the people communicate with the daiva? Now, this is the interesting part. So, every harvest season, if I'm not mistaken, they have this elaborate ritual where the whole village gathers at a particular point, the maybe the place where all the celebrations occur in that village. And there is a man who dresses up very colorfully in elaborate costume and starts performing a dance. And there is, of course, there are flowers, there is vermilion, there are all the traditional marks that are used in Hindu worship. There is a lot of song. And while this person is dancing, we believe, I mean, not we believe, the people of North Canada who practice this ritual, the belief for them is that the Daiva enters the body of this person. And then the person's dance completely changes. So if he was initially dancing, it was a slow movement, now it would become wild. And then there would be a different kind of synchronicity to it. And the person would start talking and making noises I say because rarely are these words, but these will be deciphered by somebody in the audience who would be a kind of an intelligent person, a smart person who knows these kinds of things, and he would then interpret it to be the message from the Daiva who has possessed this chosen person. And then that chosen person, now we are talking about positions, right? So usually in the Western society, what happens is when somebody is possessed, like the case of Annalise Michel, and there are so many cases. Those people are considered as pariahs. They are kept away from society. They are considered as diseased and bad. But in India, and especially in both the cases of Jagar, which I told you about, and the Bhuta Kola case, which I'm talking to you about, in both these cases, the people who are possessed, they are worshipped, they are venerated, they are kept on a higher pedestal in society because these possessions are considered to be godly possessions. And whatever these people say, that becomes a part of what divinity is telling us. So these are two examples that I'm giving you. We have demonic possessions also, which are way and way bad, but these possessions are not documented. We have a whole legion of demons. We have the asuras here. So essentially, Hindu mythology is about the tussle between the devas, that is the gods, and the asuras, that is the demons. It's the fight between the good and evil. We have a very black and white kind of mythology. And there is this time when the gods prevail, and there are times when the asuras have the upper hand. And these asuras are relentless, despite being defeated time and time again. Our Ramayana and Mahabharata, both epics are about it. The whole story of Durga Ma is about it. But still, the asuras are relentless and they will keep coming back. And they keep coming back in different forms, and they pester humans, they trouble us, and the gods have to again come back. And what do the demons do when they come to earth? The current where we stand, and I'll end at this. Where we stand is that in the current scenario, when the demons come to earth, they want a house to stay. And I'm not talking about a physical house, I'm talking about a spiritual house. They need a human, and they find a vulnerable human who would be open to something like a demon coming inside him or her, and that's where it begins. So, do we have exorcisms? Yes, we do. Do we condone some of these exorcisms? No, we don't, because some of these are very bad and sad to say. As is the way, like exorcisms in the Catholic Church are something that are a very elaborate system. You cannot have an exorcism just at your whim and fancy. The church has to approve it, and it's not so easy. But in Hinduism, exorcisms of people who are perceived to be possessed by demons or negative spirits happen sometimes in the temples also, and they happen in a kind of way that you would not want to watch. I mean, it would make a fantastic horror movie if it would not be so controversial. So, I'll not talk about that now because we have a discussion going on, and maybe I'll get a chance to talk about it. Thanks.
Thank you, sir, for such an incredible explanation. So many cultures and religion believe in possession and exorcism, where a dark entity, whether it is jinn or demon, invades and overpowers a person or place, leading to potential harm or death. Science often attributes such phenomena to neurological disorders, while faith suggests that it is a demonic entity and can only be resolved through divine intervention. Having said that, we would love to dig deeper the haunting theme by moving on to the question answer segment. Um, so, my first question is for Professor Sari. Um, Ma'am, based on your paper titled Demonic Possession and Lived Religion in Later Medieval Europe, please share with us some examples from the medieval sources where possession and exorcism was interpreted through the lens of cultural and religious windows. What types of rituals were there to evict the evil spirits from a person or a place?
Thank you. Yes, during the Middle Ages, the most common ritual to get rid of malevolent spirits was the pilgrimage to the shrine of a saint, and that's common all through the Europe and all through the Western Christianity. Sometimes lay people tried some forms of exorcism as well, and sometimes that could be tried at the shrine, but most typically the possessed were just carried, if they were unable to walk, carried to the shrine, and they lied there waiting for the saint to work and the delivery to come through the saint's powers. But when we're thinking about this kind of cultural differences, I think they are most visible in for how the people sort of what kind of situation they saw as a possession. And for example, in Italian cases, it's quite often linked to the political situation, and the kind of reasoning and explanations come sort of from below. So in Italy, we find cases that actually the possessing entity was not demon as such, but maybe a local sort of recently deceased malefactor, or maybe a robber or something that comes outside from the community of the victim and outside of the community of the saint. And then the saint's power sort of drove out these malevolent forces, whether they were demons or these deceased sort of robbers or other perpetrators of violent acts. Well, in the north, it's more typical to find demonic possession for being as a reason for being punished by the saint. So the saint could command the demons, so of course drive them out, but also command them to punish a person that had been not respectful enough for the saint. And here the kind of whole reasoning and the explanation of what is a demonic possession and why things have sort of happened the way they did, so it comes from the local clergy. So if in Italy, the kind of reasoning and the logic they can see in the medieval sources is bottom up from the lay sphere of life. In North, it comes from sort of top down.
Thank you so much. So, moving on to Deborah, ma'am, as a fellow of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry and editor in chief of The Skeptic, it would be wonderful if you share some of the most intriguing or surprising cases you've encountered in your research on the paranormal related to possession and exorcism of evil spirits.
Yeah, I'm not a person who goes out and does investigations myself. I have lots of friends who belong to paranormal groups who do. My investigations tend to be very book-based. I read and write a lot. And so for me, it's interesting to pick up patterns and to look at kind of the general social dynamics behind a lot of possessions and obsessions. Obsessions are where you've got supernatural entities kind of bugging people. They're not possessing them necessarily, but you get them coming in and just annoying somebody. It can be quite destructive. I suppose that good examples of that is poltergeists. Poltergeists have been very popular for several centuries. Hauntings that bear poltergeist experience. Traits have been around for a long time, but they seem to have really taken off since kind of 1600 or so. There's loads of examples of them. There was a case that I wrote a lot about called the Enfield poltergeist, which happened in the 1970s in London. And in general, I would say a lot of these things have a lot of very similar traits. It's quite often a young woman at the center of them. Not always, you know, there are young men too, but generally it's girls, women, as it is with demonic possession, and also young women who are sort of who are giving witchcraft accusations as well. I mean, I can think of several witch trials where kind of the whole thing was started off by girls who were behaving in a very hysterical kind of a manner. The War Boys witches in 1594, 1589 to 1593 in England would fall into that category. So you've got these you've got young girls, and I don't know whether or not that's because young girls are a bit more socially capable than young boys. That would be a plausible explanation. Or whether it would be that young girls were, in times gone by, far more kind of socially restricted than boys were. So boys would be able to work their energy out in a way that just girls wouldn't. And perhaps this was a more sophisticated way of channeling frustration and misery. But with the Enfield poltergeist, I mean, again, so many of these things, yes, there are mysteries out there, but frankly, a mystery isn't an answer. A mystery is just another question. And if you can come up with a more plausible response to something going on, then that's a better approach than just to say, well, there's lots of stuff out there that we don't know. So, and I think that there are plausible responses to why people end up sort of, you know, having poltergeist cases. As I say, there's quite often a load of frustration from a young girl. There is the social role of what I've called the facilitator when I've written about it, which is young kids don't have a lot of social clout, but people can come in with more social clout who have an investment in promoting the whole event, whatever it is. So, for example, the Fox sisters who inadvertently started off the religion of spiritualism. They didn't do this all by themselves. They were just a couple of teenagers in a remote place in you know, sort of New England. But their case was taken on by a couple of Quakers called Isaac and Amy Post, who had social connections and who were able to get the message out there. And the whole thing took on so much more momentum than the girls had originally planned. Same thing with the Enfield poltergeist. It was eventually written into a book by a guy called Guy Lyon Playfair. And Guy Playfair and a guy called Maurice Grosse were investigating Enfield at the time. So they've got this facilitator role where they augment the story. They get the story out there that may well have just disappeared otherwise. So yeah, so I'm interested in poltergeists, basically.
Thank you so much. So quick on to Neil sir. Sir, in haunted real life encounters with ghosts and spirits, you explore true ghost stories. It would be great if you could share with us how you collected these true stories and what was the most surprising or unsettling account you had encountered. So you're muted.
Yeah. So I've written two books, non-fiction books, like that deal with these real life ghost stories, as you say. One of them is Haunted, which you have mentioned, and the other one is The Spirits Talk to Me. So in both of these books, the way that we went about it was, I'm an author, and I'm not an expert on these subjects. I don't believe myself to be. I collaborated with people who deal with these subjects. Like they are paranormal investigators, quite famous, both of them. One of them is Jai Alani, with whom I collaborated for Haunted. So what Jai has done is he has visited more than 600 haunted locations in India and now worldwide, and he spends his time there tries to learn what's the energy of the place like, and whether there is actually anything haunted in these places. So the stories that we wrote in this book were about places like Kuldhara, Bhangad. Kuldhara is a village in India that just got abandoned 250 years ago, and we don't know why the villagers just moved out and left the whole settlement behind. Bhangad is a fort which is considered to be the scariest place in India, which once again was, the it was the subject of a curse, and then the whole fort collapsed. It still stands, but the thing is, it's now considered to be haunted. So, in such locations, we went and we tried to find out what was the reason why these places are considered to be so haunted, and what energies do they carry. So that those are the stories that are there in the book. It's a part of first-hand research. And similarly, in the book, The Spirits Talk to Me, we have stories of 10 of the most, I don't know, you asked me of one hair-raising case, but when we were writing The Spirits Talk to Me, the 10 stories that we gathered of a factory that starts on its own in the middle of the night. This factory was in Surat. So that was a very strange phenomenon where it had more than 300 workers, and none of them wanted to go back to the factory whenever these things happened. The entire workforce walked out. So there was this case. Then there was this case of a little girl of 10 who was possessed by the spirits of twin sisters who were much older. They were middle aged women, and she could see these women also. She could see them as one auntie in a black sari and an auntie in a white sari. So, she could see both of them, and she would speak in two different voices, trying to emulate them. It was uh, a case that drove people up the wall, and we tried to research on it and try to analyze what was uh, the reason why this was happening, and that was a part of one of the stories. But the case that really made the book in The Spirits Talk to Me was the case of the Kalinga War. So this Kalinga War was a very famous battle in India that happened. King Ashok, he defeated. Uh, uh, about 1 lakh people died on the battlefield, and today that place is still considered to be haunted by the spirits of the people who died there. People who go there, they still hear voices, they can see the souls walking about. Sometimes it's very rare that that happens. And in one particular case, this is the case that we wrote about, a man actually saw a war elephant multiple times on the battlefield. So we tried to find out what was this thing about that elephant. So this became one of the cases. So such cases in the book, The Spirits Talk to Me, they may be small cases, maybe big cases, but they are cases that were full of some kind of intrigue, and they had no clear answers. I don't know even if our stories did justice to that.
Thank you so much. So, can we move forward with the second question, or because we have already overshot the time, if it is okay for all of you, we can put through the second question and the common question as well. If it is okay, I can go forward with it.
It's okay with
Is
me.
it okay? Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. So, moving forward with Sari ma'am, referring to your chapter titled A Good Wife, Demonic Possession and Discourses of Gender in the Late Medieval Culture, published in the book Gender in Late Medieval and Early Modern Europe by Rutledge. How does the discourse of demonic possession, which is related to fear, connect with the concept of good wife, which is perpetual sorry, perceptual? So can you please answer this, ma'am? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Well, I think a demoniac is the complete opposite of the good wife, because whether it is a man or a woman, he acts unruly, and she's out of control. She's chaotic. And when we think about this kind of ideal femininity during the Middle Ages, the ideal wife is meek and docile and obedient and subordinate to her husband. Of course, the kind of daily life, these kind of gender relations were different, but we can argue that that is one of the ideal modes of femininity for married women. Women demoniacs are the complete opposite of this ideal. And I think it may be one of the reasons that actually women were deemed more often as demoniacs, because their violation of the common norms and sort of cultural expectations was bigger than for men, even if the demoniacs could act exactly the same way whether they were men or women. But for men, this kind of aggressive behavior and being more unorganized and demanding, using a loud voice, etc., was more acceptable than for women. And I think it may be just this fear that these women demoniacs provoked by transgressing not only the boundaries of gender, but also I'd say this sex, because they acted very untypically for women. They possessed sort of supernatural strength, etc., that was not typical for other women. So I think it's very the kind of this kind of being the opposite of good wife, and its linkage to fear is one of the reasons that women stand out numerically as victims of demonic possession.
Thanks a lot. To Deborah, ma'am, as a skeptic, how do you approach investigating claims of possession and exorcism when there are deep cultural beliefs attached to it? Have you encountered the painful experiences of the feminine during your processes?
I don't think there's anything incompatible between investigating exorcism and appreciating that there is a cultural context. In fact, I think it's vital to understanding it. If you were to just take this out of its context, it would seem you wouldn't get the insight. You'd be judgmental. It's very important to understand the context and to realise that it has at many times been incredibly useful to a community. It's not particularly pretty to watch sometimes. I mean, scapegoating is ugly and can lead to people dying. But the fact that people have something to do, that a language for their distress, if you like, is understandable, if not always attractive. So I don't think those two are incompatible. As I've touched on before, I think girls and women turn up a lot in this kind of thing, not exclusively, but a lot, and a lot for the reasons that Professor Sari has touched on. I mean, it's some really valid thoughts there. And I was just thinking about the woman Marjorie Kemp, again in the 15th century, who was, she attracted a lot of attention because they were wondering if she was being hypocritical. She was going outside gender norms to do what she did, and to us she seems entirely like a narcissist. I mean, she seems like a deeply unattractive person. But within her own cultural context, there were some people, not all of them actually, I have to say, she annoyed an awful lot of her contemporaries, but there were people who felt that what she was doing was religiously virtuous. But she kind of had to have people, explaining how that was the case. She wore white, for example, which was something that only unmarried women were supposed to be doing, so she was thought to be hypocritical. There were all sorts of reasons, but again, she ended up forming a non-sexual relationship with her husband. Which was a religious, something you had to agree with with your husband in advance, and it was a religious undertaking that they would have a chaste marriage. And you've got to wonder, actually, if a woman who had had 14 children and who had postpartum psychosis after the first, if part of her religious life was just trying to get the hell out of being on the childbearing treadmill, whether she realized that consciously or not, so I think as a skeptic you can look at phenomena that, and there are two levels of explanation. You can take the supernatural explanation, or you can look a bit further and you can look into the social dynamics of it. And there's usually an understandable human element to all of these cases.
Thank you so much. Neil sir, I would go to Neil sir. So there's a faith in one hand and science on the other hand. Can the two coexist? Is it interesting that you? It is interesting, definitely, that you are author of horror stories, and you come with a science background. How does the supernatural lean on scientific explanations? How do your views influence your approach to writing about these haunted topics?
By saying what Charles Darwin said at the end of his life. And I think people are aware of this, but I'll repeat because it's something that uh, keeps me thinking. So Darwin, when he had worked his entire life on the survival of the fittest and theories like that, and finally he came up with the grand theory of evolution, which is what we strongly believe in now. Of course, there are many naysayers for it also, but at the end of his life, Darwin said that to do this entire thing, to bring all of this into effect and to put every molecule in its right place, it is not the work of a simple evolutionary process. There has to be something governing it. There has to be a cosmic force doing this. And that cosmic force is what we believe in to be God, or to be, we call it as God. So that is what Darwin said on his deathbed. And if I am not mistaken, he was an atheist all his life. But at the end of it, he uh, said that there must be something that is driving the whole world. So when I started out writing horror, I was a kind of um, I was very practical about this. I would not say skeptic because I have had experiences even way back when I was a child, things that I could not put my finger on, but I kept an open mind. However, I was leaning a lot towards I need to see proof to believe things are true. Like when people would tell me stories of ghosts and spirits and all, I enjoyed them. I loved the genre for reading, but I never believed that ghosts actually do exist. I had a few life altering experiences later on in life, like when I was in my late 20s. I actually saw my grandfather like around 12 years after his demise, and he came to me at a point where I was very in some struggle in buying my house, and that was a time when he came to me and he made the process easier for me now. And this would not ring true if I was the only one who encountered him, but it was also my mother and my brother. We all three of us saw my grandfather coming at this juncture in my life. So that changed me a little bit. Like, how did that happen? Later on, when I started writing horror, uh, when I decided to write my books. My first book was an out and out kind of book based on our mythology. So it did not take anything from a real experience. So I took something, an aspect of our culture. I took actually Aghoris. They are pretty uh, occultist kind of people, right? So I took Aghoris and I wrote a story around them. I wrote it only to tell people about what Aghoris really are, and I wrote it as a thriller. At that time, also, I did not believe a lot in what ghosts are, spirits are. I wrote the book as a book. Later on, when I started delving deeper into the horror genre, that is, I would say after 2015, when I became a member of the Horror Writers Association, when I started writing the non-fiction works that you mentioned earlier in your question, that was the time when I actually came across a lot of people who have had experiences. I was writing a show for Discovery during the COVID pandemic. And during this time, we were taking real life stories from people across India. And during this time, I heard a lot of stories from people who have gone through experiences that they could not rationalize. So that is where I think, Haimanti, I changed. I went from being this kind of person who wanted a proof for everything to being a person who keeps an open mind and says that, okay, there is something in this universe, not something. There were a lot of things in this universe that we cannot really explain. What we know might be just an infinitesimal fraction of what actually exists out there. Uh, and that's the same with possession also. We don't know where it comes from. So that's it. I keep my mind open, and that is where I stand today. I would not say that I'm a complete skeptic or I'm a complete believer yet, but it's a journey.
Thank you so much. But before ending our this panel discussion, I would like to ask the last question, which, if if you can just sum it up quickly. This is a common question for all our panelists here. Is that in the debate between scientific progression and supernatural beliefs, what are your personal opinions that can help find a balance between respecting the cultural traditions and promoting scientific evidences? Sari, ma'am, you can go forward.
Thank you. Very, very good and very difficult question. Well, I think because I'm a historian, and as a medievalist, I think it's very important. It's also part of the kind of ethical requirements of doing historical research that you treat with respect the people of the era that you are studying. So I think because before this book on demonic possession, I have studied miracles, and they are kind of bit of a similar phenomenon that modern science does not believe in them. They do not exist, just like demons. But those people during the Middle Ages, they were part of. Also, there were these kind of scientific inquiries on miracles, also, which is part of this my demonic possession book about miracles on deliveries from demonic possession. So my take on this is that for me, in my research, what I'm interested in is how these people of this era that I'm studying, that they have been dead like 500-600 years already, I take it what they think of it and how they see the phenomenon. And it's not really my thing to judge as a historian whether this miracle actually took place, or maybe there could be some sort of natural explanation, or whether this case actually was a demonic possession, because these people that I'm studying, they believe that this was a case of demonic possession, and they believe that this was a genuine miracle. And it's my job to explain how and why they believed in that, and how did that affect their daily life and their culture and society. So I don't sort of touch that kind of what is real in this sense. Sorry, I don't have more kind of any definite
That's
answer for this question.
That's okay. That's okay. Thank you so much. Moving on to Deborah, ma'am.
Yeah, I really like Professor Sari's approach there. And you're not much of a historian if you can't put phenomena in their historical context. You must do it, and people thought differently to the way we do in the past, and it's very, very important to be able to approach it that way, and to sort of provide that story, that foundation, if you like, around their experiences and what happened. So we should understand that. As you can respect people without believing their beliefs, and I certainly know I am friends with plenty of people who go ghost hunting. So I don't believe in ghosts, but I can still go to the pub with people who believe in ghosts and look for them. That's fine. I think what we could benefit from is at school people learning the fundamentals of critical thinking, so that they don't fall for the more obvious traps, that we're all liable to in mistaking what goes on. I think that these things, these beliefs will always be with us, because the easier life gets, the more that we can afford to be analytical about them. The harder that life gets, the more that people tend to lean on religious and superstitious practices, because they are great compensators, and they help people to feel that they have agency, that they have control, and that somebody cares about them. So these things are never going to go away, so we can't just try to out-logic them and to out-logic people so they do, they go with the sensible way. But although we can afford to be very understanding of people in the past, I think we have to be fairly robust with people in the present who are doing damage. And there are some people who are doing damage that is justified by supernatural beliefs, and especially where there are children involved, and this is happening now. So we can't be relativist under those circumstances, and we do have to bring a more rational scientific view to bear.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. So we move on to Neil, sir.
Yeah, both my co-panelists have answered this question so beautifully already. There's nothing left for me to say. But I just say that if we are talking about this debate of science versus supernatural, we have to first consider like where the supernatural comes from. Where do all these beliefs originate from? The belief, I think they start from way back times before people actually knew what was what. It came from direct observations. Like I'll just give this quick example of Ayurveda. Ayurveda comes from, this is our holistic practice of medicine, but it comes from years and years and centuries of understanding what works for a human system. Now, it may not be a very documented scientific approach for medicine, but some people do believe very strongly that it works, and it still exists after so many millennia. So it's like this. I think all these beliefs in the demons and gods and whatever we have been talking about today, these just come from people's thought process. They may not have been able to articulate it, document it, and put it in a way that science has done it. So I just think science is a more systematic approach to putting the laws of the universe in place. And the supernatural is more of an observation. I don't want to stand on a pedestal and say that, okay, this does not happen. Definitely, I don't want to do that. It might have happened to somebody, and that is why it was put on paper, or maybe not on paper, in oral tradition, and it came down the ages. But this science has still to catch up with everything that the supernatural lore has put out there. Yeah.
Thanks a lot for that addition. So this brings us to the end of our spooky yet fascinating session. So thank you, Sari ma'am, Deborah ma'am, and Neil sir, for your very insightful conversation and for your valuable time this evening. Tell Me Your Story calls for submission on the writing prompt Echoes and Whisper, which intends to explore various noises and conversations emerging from our internal and external hemispheres. Registrations are also open for a host of workshops for or aspiring authors. We hope to hear from you soon. Till then, stay well, stay happy, stay together. Have a nice day and good night.
Good
Thank
night.
you so much. Good
Thank
night.
you. Bye bye.